congratulations for staying the course. And this is the roadmap, and really this session is all about the big blue arrow. It's kind of wrapping everything that we've been talking about up so that we can review, refine, refresh and retrain. So webinar 8, review, refine, refresh and retrain. So what I wanted to do was to review the webinar series, to summarize a key slide from the eHealth Strategy Toolkit, and then to give for each of the webinars kind of just one summary diagram. And then in the Q&A, perhaps have your suggestions for how the presentation and the webinar series could be improved, to give us some feedback and perhaps to suggest some new topics or topics that can be dropped, and then to just give you a few frameworks that actually kind of really tie everything together. And I'll conclude with one that overlays a lot of what we've been talking about onto the top of COBIT. And then finally give you some overall capacity building resources and the final quiz. So that's the plan for webinar 8. So if you remember, in webinar 1 we were concerned primarily with the issues around leadership, which is clearly what the decision makers in organisations need to be concerned with. And in that webinar I really gave a talk about the eHealth Strategy Toolkit, mentioning the importance of stakeholder engagement, and also talked you through the highlights of the 3 parts of the toolkit to do with developing the vision, framing action plans, and monitoring evaluation. So that webinar really was to set the scene for what followed, which in webinar 2 focused on institutional readiness and majored on the issues around governance. And if you remember, the flavour for the webinar series is on leadership that can deliver an action plan. So it is really trying to help you all engage with the processes of having got a strategy. How do we then begin to implement it? And understanding institutional readiness in terms of governance in particular is a very important part of that whole process. And I talked through the ISO 38500 principles. If you remember, that was around responsibility, making sure you've got a governing body in place, that the strategies regarding the appropriate planning of IT capabilities are also well made, that IT is to be seen as just a part of the wider business when it comes to making acquisitions of equipment, that in terms of implementation, effective governance comes when goals are set from the top down, but that metrics are established really from the bottom up, and that both things need to align. ISO 38500 also stresses the importance of compliance with external requirements as being an integral part of the whole process, and also that training and skills enhancement is a key part of change, capacity building in other words. And then we touched on the controlled objectives for information and related technology, COBIT. It's got 5 principles, but it really is structured around, on the one hand, having clarity about the governance arrangements so that you can look at stakeholder needs and conditions and options and set the direction and monitor performance and compliance, the overall governance arrangements. But then that's complemented by a set of management arrangements to do the planning, building, running and monitoring activities to make sure that it all runs smoothly. And COBIT, in addition to its 5 principles, has got 37 processes, and which we'll come back to later on, and 300 control objectives. So it's quite a well-developed body of knowledge. ITIL version 3, the IT Information Library, again, a set of good practice documentation that is clearly geared to supporting the business goals. And it sets out a service strategy, which needs to stay focused on the business case, and then supports that with service design activities, service transition, and service operation. And then last week, you remember that we talked about, on Monday this week, we talked about continual service improvement. And ISO 20000 is also there to help organisations, in a sense, prove that they are working with the ITIL recommendation. And then in webinar 3, we were focused on architecting the interoperable enterprise. And clearly, interoperability does depend very much on there being the right foundations and solutions in place. And that's right at the heart of developing the action plans to implement an e-health strategy. And in terms of the structure of that session, we talked about the enterprise architecture and the way in which that needs to be related to the goals and e-health components, which I've just covered. But then I also talked about some of the criteria that can be used to compare enterprise architecture methodologies that include, for example, things like assessing how complete their taxonomy is, or how kind of vendor neutral are they, or how well developed is their maturity model. So there are a range of different criteria that have been used, and then I talked you through 4 exemplar enterprise architectures that are of different natures, in a sense. And the Zachman taxonomy, if you remember, basically has a framework that sketches out, on the one hand, across the top, so to speak, of a table, who, what, when, where, and why, and then answer those questions for example, planners, business owners, designers, implementers, subcontractors, etc. And in the boxes that are filled within that matrix, you have a whole range of activities that need to be developed if you're going to have a well-formed architecture, remembering, of course, that the nature of that architecture can vary according to the particular focus that you have. And I illustrated that with reference to an infrastructure architecture in the diagram that we shared. And then the federal enterprise architecture that's been developed by the government in the USA is quite a mammoth undertaking, but that quite helpfully distinguishes or develops a methodology that makes clear that there are various core missions that every federal government needs to be undertaking, and health is certainly one of them. There are also a number of common business services that governments have to deliver on, including financial management and human resources. And these things can be undertaken by different agencies that kind of cut across all of those activities. So there are, what in their jargon, segments of activity. But one of the key insights and things that PF kind of majors on is making sure that you've got the common enterprise-wide services, such as security management and records management and geocoding, for example, handled in a uniform way by all the agencies working for all the business services or the core mission areas. So something that's been developed for a very complex organisation that may be of relevance to you. And then Gartner provides an example of the way in which a consultancy can provide a range of good practices and services in analysing an enterprise architecture. And then we turn to TOGAF, which is really concerned with kind of a range of process issues relating a continuum, really, of architecture and solutions, and looking at the relationships between generic architectures and specific architectures and generic solutions and specific solutions, and framing the way in which each guides the other in an iterative process, so that you move from the initial architecture context and requirements to the solutions that are deployed, and there's a feedback loop built in there. But of course, for architects to have joined up conversations with people in different parts of the same organisation, they need to have kind of a common language that can help in this articulation between architectural models and the realities that people experience in their everyday parts of their organisation. And that really is what Archimate is there to do. And just to remind you that she had an AeHIN hour on Archimate as a very helpful modelling language. So moving on to webinar 4, which was about standards and interoperability, an absolutely central component of any national e-health strategy, and a lot of attention is paid to it, rightly, in the toolkit. So the way this webinar worked was that I reminded you of some of the core competences for people who are dealing with data standards, and I also talked about some of the standards development organisations, mentioning in particular ISO 2C215, which is concerned with the kind of the health sector, and that they've got over 125 specific health informatics standards already developed and delivered. So, you know, health is a very important part of the whole standards development program. And then I talked through the different types of standards that there are that are needed to enable interoperability. And the core standards to do with communications and transport, as well as security, so things like TCP/IP and some of the secure sockets standards for cryptography. And the security standards in particular, I mentioned the ISO 27000 series, which is really the body of standards that relate to information security management. So those are fundamentally important to any introduction of information systems in the context of healthcare. And then standards that you may well be slightly more familiar with, to do with meaning, international classification diseases, clinical terms, RONC, etc. So messaging standards and DICOM and HR7 are the two major messaging standards that are most likely to be of concern in the context of healthcare. But that all those also need well-structured data models and data dictionaries to enable the information systems to be constructed so that individuals, people and health facilities, for example, can be uniquely identified. And I also talked in that webinar about the importance of information standards, both for health professionals and also for the public. So for the health professionals, I was just pointing to some of the work that's been going on with offering training to health professionals in good practice in record keeping, for example, and the recording of data. And for the public, I pointed you to some work on that focuses on the quality of information that is being provided for the public. Actually, on the TV in the UK yesterday, there was a little piece about the dangers of relying on anything on Wikipedia for sort of self-diagnosis, and I was sorry that they didn't then point people to a good source of well-qualified, good quality information, which is, for example, the NHS Choices website. So it is a very live and important issue, the standards that guide information for patients and the public. So that was webinar 4 on standards and interoperability, which you need if, as we discussed in webinar 5, you're trying to exchange health information. And I connected this back to the importance of developing an integrated action plan, and put in the quote there at the bottom about the international evidence showing that it is important to take steps at a national level if you're going to have effective health information exchange, which is, after all, what health information systems are there to enable. So the way in which I structured this was to talk about the integrating of the foundations and the solutions. And then I gave some illustrations around first of all, the open health information exchange. And I gave Rwanda as an example of the way in which you need to have registries and that depend on all the data dictionaries, etc., so that you identify clients and health workers and health facilities. That you have an interoperability layer, which is where all the clever application programming interfaces sit, that enable the different points of service, whether they're mobile devices that a community health worker may have on the one hand, or advanced clinical and pharmacy systems perhaps in a major hospital. So from those points of service via the interoperability layer for uniquely identified people and places, you need to be able to develop and deliver shared health records. And the open HIE architecture is a helpful one, I think, to bear in mind when you're trying to think about health information exchange. And bear in mind, you may have some local examples in the Philippines, for example, to draw on. I also stressed quite a bit the integrating the healthcare enterprise, which looks at the challenge internationally. It's got a supporting ISO standard associated with it. And if you remember, it consists of basically 4 steps that you have. First of all, agreement about the use cases that are going to be tested, then some detailed specifications are drawn up for them by the AeHIN experts who come from both clinical and technical communities, and then industry implements those, and then they're tested in connectathons and the results are published. And then I talked about health information exchange in the context of the USA, where it's becoming a very a very kind of fast developing part of their health information system. And I talked about both the direct aspects of it and the query-based. The direct being where you have an institution exchanging information with another institution that it knows, and the query-based exchange is basically being between a much larger group of organisations, and currently I think they've got 800 hospitals and 6,000 medical groups who have got a data use and reciprocal support agreement, a DIRSA agreement in place, so that if you're sitting in one institution, you can make a query to all the others to find out whether the patient that you've seen has been treated in one of them, and if so, to be able to retrieve and or have exchanged the relevant items of information. But I also flagged up the important third aspect of health information exchanges as they're developing in the States, to do with consumer-mediated exchanges, and mentioned the patient-generated health data, and also talked a bit about Continua as being a good example of how individual citizens can have their personal devices sending data either automatically or sent deliberately by them into a kind of a telehealth service centre and connected with their health records. So this is likely to become an increasingly important part of the agenda. And then finally, I drew your attention to the importance of the exchange of skill and knowledge. And an excellent case study here is the use of Hingix, and that's a very good result that brings together information and tools and people and enables you to exchange relevant health information and knowledge. So that was health information exchange. And then in webinar 6, that's saying, okay, well, those are great ideas, great standards. Now, how are we going to actually deliver it and make something happen? And I talked about program management, developing the only bit in the toolkit in part 3 that mentions program management. It's only that material that's in there. But that is because it focuses on monitoring and evaluation. So far as program management is concerned, then I felt we needed to pay attention to both PMBOK and Prince2, and that's what we did in the kind of the controlled environment. So PMBOK is very well structured. It's got very kind of defined data models. I gave you an example of that, and I illustrated that one with the stakeholder engagement aspect of running successful projects using PMBOK. Prince2, the projects in controlled environments, second version, if you remember, has got a set of principles that guides it, and a set of themes, and a set of processes. So the principles cover things like you've got a continued business justification. If that disappears, then stop the project. That the project is managed by stages and by exception, and that it's tailored to suit the project's environment. And the themes are to do with the classic challenges of having a business case, basically asking the who, what, where, why questions in a structured way. And then the processes are around directing, managing and delivering, so that you've got a set of clearly defined stages kicked off by a project initiation document, and one stage carefully managed before you move on to the next one. And sitting around Prince2 or underpinning Prince2 and in relationship to PMBOK as well, there are associated standards. And I pointed out that what Prince2 doesn't cover in terms of document management is covered in BS 6079, and what isn't covered in Prince2 in terms of procurement and skills and competences is picked up in ISO 21500. So there are, as you well know, overlaps between the different standards that are being developed. And then in terms of the other aspects of project management, in contrast, there are the agile project management features where you have the possibility to have more of a more collaborative approach, where the time and budgets are much more tightly agreed. You have analyze, plan activities followed by design, build, test, and then you go through that cycle again. So it's in contrast to what the waterfall style of Prince type project management. Good for coming up with rapid delivery of value to customers, and that's why it's in a sense coming to taking a higher profile as a lot of Prince and PMBOK projects get a little bogged down before they actually deliver good quality outcomes. So Agile gives you some faster feedback from users. In a complementary way, the Compatibility Maturity Model Integration, CMMI, talks about the way in which organisations should be nurtured so that they move from a state of maturity where basically you're firefighting all the time through 5 stages, so that at the end of it you're basically able to prevent fires happening in the first place. That's the analogy. In terms of delivery of service management and operations, I flagged up the fact that ITIL has also got a specific part of it that deals with that, and which is supported by ISO 20000. And then the recurring theme around information security was addressed with COBIT 5, the extended view of COBIT 5 on information security, which again has got the mapping to ISO 27002. So this is basically trying to give, from the point of view of the COBIT framework, guidance on matters to do with information security in really quite some detail. So that's to wrap up the delivery part of the webinar series. And that then led to the monitoring and evaluation webinar 7. And we talked about the difference between e-health outputs and outcomes, but I also mentioned the importance of governance, and that I reminded you that the ISACA and IT Governance Institute document makes the important point about IT governance being concerned primarily with both value to the business and monitoring and mitigation of IT risks. And in terms of the content of that webinar, I covered the difference between e-health outcomes and issues around IT governance, which I just mentioned, and then talked through Six Sigma with its emphasis on voice of the customer, voice of the consumer, the way in which it develops a define, measure, analyze, improve, control methodology to help structure the process of making sure that the organisation responds primarily to the issues that are of concern to its customers, whether those are external, which is really what Six Sigma is talking about, or focused on in terms of the car industry, but it has also been used for internal customers, and it also has got an associated ISO standard with it. ITIL version 3 has got its continuous service improvement module, and we talked about the 7 steps that it includes. And then COBIT version 5 has got a risk component to it, and we'd already dealt with the IT management issues concerned in webinars 2, 4, and 6. So in this webinar, I focus more on the enterprise risk management standards and the risk function. And I made the point that the COBIT model is supported by 3 others, certainly, one of which is developed by the Committee of Sponsoring Organisations of the Treadway Commission that flag up the IT principles for internal security, operational compliance, reporting objectives, organisation and structures, in a way that was guided by the need to remove the risk of financial irregularities. But in the process of doing that, it came up with a set of very useful ways of controlling what goes on in terms of risk within an organisation. And there again, there are some supporting ISO standards around information security, risk management, and the more general topic of risk management that ISO 3100 deals with. So I think, having run through that review very quickly, it's now time to have a question and answer session. But in this 10 minutes, I'd really appreciate getting suggestions from you for, what you think could be improved, and any feedback you want to give on refinements for what's been put over in this webinar series. So over to you, AeHIN.
Thanks, Peter. I hope we have some time for these two questions from Dr. Samba. Actually, this is a technical question. His square is, can you explain the difference between IT governance and EA governance, and how are they connected with each other?
Sorry, AeHIN, I didn't hear you correctly there. The difference between?
That is the difference between IT governance and EA governance.
And CA governance?
EA. I think this is enterprise architecture.
Oh, between IT governance and enterprise architecture. So the IT, okay, the information. Can I answer that question when we get to the almost the final slide? Because I think that will show you in a diagram actually where the differences are. So I'll come back to that when we talk to this diagram.
All right. I think that we leave that question for now. Any questions or comments from our room today? Most especially in how the topics are delivered, because it is very important for us to, as implementers, and for Dr. Jury as a course designer, to receive feedback from our participants on how this AeHIN Academy is conducted. Any comments from our group? Maybe from Winmin or from Sushil from Nepal? I think we have given an ample time for everyone to answer the quizzes, and it is okay, or I think it is just fine if we leave the quizzes up and we waive the deadline for the quizzes, because I understand some of our enrollees in our AeHIN Academy do not really attend the regular sessions that we have, and just log on to our portal to access the resources on their most comfortable time. And I think that design really suits well for those people who cannot really make it in our 1500 UTC GMT schedule. Okay, there's a suggestion here. Okay, please go ahead with your response before we move on to the next question and comment.
AeHIN, just one thing. I would like to know if there are new topics that ought to be added, or things that people feel are completely irrelevant.
All right.
But let me just ask people to think about that, and then when we get to the next Q&A session, perhaps we can address those issues then when they've had the time to think. So, what are the new topics that you would like me to have talked about that I haven't? And what are the things that were not relevant really for you?
All right. Actually, there's a comment here. Very good transition to the a suggestion from Dr. Trianta de Silva. It is better if we can have a separate session for COBIT 5. This is his comment. Session on COBIT 5.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Correct. And also COBIT 5, yes. For DINA room, there are a lot of standards and guidelines to build e-health, such as ISO, COBIT, and etc. Are these integrated within themselves? Because it will be difficult if we use them, but among them, there aren't integrated. So I think the question is, are they integrated with each other?
Well, I've tried to show in the where there are connections between the standards in what I've been presenting. So the answer is yes, there are relationships between them, and wherever that has come up, I've tried to flag it up. So, for example, although I didn't say this just now, you remember there was a slide that showed that between ISO 20000, which is looking at the requirements for a service management system, there's a relationship with CMMI and ITIL version 3. So CMMI is providing a framework for implementing, evolving, and sustaining and measuring improvement, and then ITIL gives a set of best practices drawn from public and private sectors. So, these things do overlap with each other, and the purpose of this webinar series really was to try and give you an overall framework within which you've got enough information to know what you might want to explore further, or what topics you might want to get additional training on for your colleagues. So I hear the question about COBIT 5, and I entirely understand why that is being raised. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. We can move on. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So what I wanted to do now was just to give you some. I've just been saying there are some frameworks that kind of show how these things fit together a bit. And so I wanted to talk about the issues around the governance and the frameworks. But first of all, just to remind you of this model that I've shown 2 or 3 times, I think now, just to share again with you on one diagram an illustration of just how complex and dynamic the delivery of healthcare is. And we do have a really, really difficult task where the technologies are evolving all the time, the health systems are evolving all the time, and actually the things that people are getting sick from are evolving all the time. So it is a very, very dynamic and complicated process full of feedback loops, positive and negative, that affect us all. So, we just need to bear that in mind, that it is very complex. And then in the preview, and I think in the first session, I gave this very simple view about how you might assemble the skills for an e-health building. So I kicked off with talking about ISO 38500, which is really focused on the management board's perspective and governance. But then what you do is really what the walls are like in terms of building a house. But you need to have that built on the foundations that are laid by having good and best practices in terms of how you manage projects and how you understand what to do in terms of, for example, service operations. But this all requires there to be an architecture. And one of the points that I didn't make just now, but just let me remind you, was the difference between solutions architecture for a specific solution, such as a house, and actually what a health enterprise architecture is about, which is really much more like the job that a city planner has, where you're looking at large numbers of houses and all the very complex interrelationships between them and the infrastructure that is needed to support them. And the little diagram on the bottom right was just to remind us that actually it isn't just about communications within a house that is of importance, though it certainly is, but it's about how do we enable individuals and organisations to communicate with each other in ways that are interoperable and enable information to be safely and securely exchanged. So that's a very kind of high level, kind of four diagram summary of what I've been trying to do at a very high level. But there was another diagram that illustrated ITIL's approach to taking time into account that I thought it was worth sharing with you. And I like this diagram because it shows the stages that you go through from developing a strategy in terms of a service. This is a service strategy, first of all, and the various policies and resources and constraints and things that need to go into getting that strategy organised, and that it is fed by the business and the customers together. And that leads on to a stage of designing the services, which requires solutions designs and architectures and standards, etc. And then you have to transition into that service. So you've got all the change management programs that need to come in, and having various tested solutions. And SKMS is Service Knowledge Management System, so a lot of detailed data that is collected about all the different elements of the system. And that feeds into improvements in the service operations and figuring out whether you are achieving against the targets. But then remember, ITIL version 3 stresses the continual service improvement. So there is a register of what is going on and how things can be improved, so that the business value loops up back to the business and customers for continuous improvement. And the outputs of all this feeds into the collation of service catalogues and service portfolios, so that you know what has been going on. And I thought that was a pretty powerful diagram, actually, to just summarise an awful lot of what we've been talking through in terms of how you implement a strategy. And that it's a dynamic process that involves a series of stages where you do different things, and there are feedback loops built in, and you're paying attention throughout to the requirements of your business and customers. So I've referenced where that's come from, and I commend it to you as a useful part of the ITIL best practice framework that you might want to reflect on. A completely different sort of picture is this one. And this is called the Caldemar IT Governance Framework. And basically, again, on one diagram, it's trying to pull together an awful lot of ideas around basically, again, topics that I hope you'll recognise. So IT strategy, change, IT balance, information technology balance sheet, operations, business strategy, and risk. And you'll see how each of these are kind of played out. And so if you look in each of these segments, I hope you will see topics that I've covered. You will also see in each of them topics that I haven't covered. So what I've been giving you is not a complete rundown, although it may feel like it's been far too much. But I hope that I've selected from this very kind of rich palette the right blend of standards and approaches that will be of most help to you. There are an awful lot as is summarised in this diagram. But again, if you just want on one page to, in a sense, see the issues that need to be considered, then this is a useful diagram. It helps you kind of visualise some of the challenges that need to be addressed. So again, I hope that's of some relevance and help to you. Okay, so now COBIT has been mentioned both in what I've said and in what questions that have come back. And just to remind you again, it distinguishes between the governance and the management parts of the picture. So the governance is really concerned with evaluation, directing and monitoring activities, or EDM as it's often called, and management with aligning, planning and organising and building and acquiring and implementing solutions, and then delivering services and support, how you run the organisation, and then a monitor, evaluate and assess framework at the end. And this COBIT program has been evolving over a number of years now, and it's evolved this reference model, which is very helpful because it unpacks these 37 different processes that have been identified, and these change as time goes on. But broadly speaking, that is the overarching reference model that the COBIT program has come up with. And I just wanted to make the point that things like the COBIT security or the COBIT risk issues are addressed with particular processes within this model. So some are more relevant than others depending on the topic of concern, but they all have relevance overall. So those are the different ways in which you can think about the activities that need to go on, and also the reference to the sources for guidance on them. So I think that is the overall framework that is most powerful in terms of enabling you to understand what it is that you need to do. And if I could just now re-present that and show you how what I've tried to do in this webinar series is to kind of illustrate different aspects of what needs to be done, and that they can be mapped to the COBIT 5 model. So if we take the evaluate, direct and monitor component, this is where we kicked off with ISO 38500, the corporate governance of IT. And then ITIL version 3 has got really quite significant overlap with the align, plan and organise, build, acquire and implement, deliver, service and support parts of the COBIT model. And it in turn is supported by the ISO 20000 set of standards. And then TOGAF and Archimate. So the question that came earlier on about the relationship between enterprise architecture, for example, TOGAF, or it could be Zachman or FEAF or others, basically is trying to make sure that you are aligning, planning and organising the management of the organisation in a way that enables you then to build, acquire and implement solutions that are joined up. So TOGAF doesn't really address monitoring, evaluating and assessing, and it isn't really concerned with the high-level governance activities that are the focus of the top box, the processes for governance of the enterprise. That isn't TOGAF remit, but it is concerned with how you align what you want to go on inside an enterprise with what you then need to require is built and implemented. So I hope that answers the question that was raised earlier on. So we had TOGAF and Archimate, and then the IT security, you'll see kind of overlaps everything to a greater or lesser extent. And then the project management tools that we looked at, PMBOK and Prince2, they're supporting standards of ISO 21500 and VS 6079. They're again sitting in terms of, okay, so how are we going to make these projects happen to deliver the solutions that have been proposed as being what the enterprise actually requires, right? So that's really where they fit into and map into the COBIT 5 framework. And then the CMMI maturity model cuts across all of that, and you're hoping that you're moving through these implementations to support an organisation going from level 1 up to level 5. The Six Sigma set of standards and approach, and it's supporting ISO 13453, really are looking at the way in which the experiences of the customers of the organisation can have their views monitored, evaluated and assessed, and that will then feed into the next iteration of work. And that clearly is closely connected with the continual service improvement bits of ITIL, and COSO is also addressing these, but has a closer connection with the governance of the whole enterprise as well. And finally, that brings us back then to the risk management ISO 31000 framework. So I hope that has given you on one diagram a summary that is carefully color-coded so that you can go back and see where each of these were covered in the webinars, because the colors relate to the ones I've just given you in the summary slides just now. And that will be a useful resource for you as you proceed to use the material that I've been sharing with you. So the suggestion for using this came from Dr. Alvin, and I'm very grateful to him for making that suggestion. And it's based on the reference that I've given you at the bottom there. So I've elaborated that, but basically that does connect everything together, I hope, in a way that is useful for you. So happy now to have another round of question and answer and sharing. Maybe you've got some further reflections as to what can be dropped and what people would like more of next time. Thanks, Elia.
Thank you, Peter. There's a comment here from our chat box from Sushi Lekha from Nepal. It was really good. It was really a good learning course. Some of the terms which are not common to us are hard to understand and remember. So we may need to simply give this elaborated name of these standards and terms so that new users could understand it. So what to say about that, Peter?
Am I seeing? No. So I'm not seeing that from, yeah, okay. Yes, thank you, Sushil. Appreciate that coming from the call. So if I heard it correctly, it's basically what I've been saying is helpful, but it will need to be reworked if it's going to be useful for use within a country where people maybe don't have very great understanding of the information and standards issues that we've been covering.
All right. Thank you. We go now to another comment. Thank you, Mr. Peter and AeHIN team that made us understand a lot of guidelines to develop e-health, especially e-health in my city. The link that Mr. Peter had given in the presentation have a lot of information to complete this course material. So I think the resources that you have provided in the slides are really helpful to them to understand more of, especially those that were not mentioned in your slides.
Thank you.
Okay, and this is a follow-up from Dina. This course upgraded my knowledge about e-health and gave new experience about using e-learning. It's important for me as a lecturer and practitioner of e-health. Thank you. I think the course really targeted e-health professionals and serve its purpose for those who are in their ministries or in their universities now introducing e-health. But we really have to give consideration to those who are new into the field and who are exploring probably careers on e-health. Any suggestion on the background or learning expectations which should be indicated when we go for the next call or the AeHIN Academy 101?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and it's a difficult one actually to answer because people who are coming new in a sense into e-health will have all sorts of different expectations, and they'll be coming into e-health from different backgrounds, and some may be coming to it because they're a clinician, and some may be coming from administration, being a secretary. Some may be interested in it because they have, as a patient, had an episode in hospital where they may have felt that better information would have meant that they would have received better care, or their relatives would have received better care. So everybody, in a sense, comes to e-health from a different point of view, which means that it's actually quite difficult to think of a course, in a sense, that can be given that will be of relevance to everybody. So, but it's a good challenge. It wasn't the challenge that I was really given, I don't think, in preparing this course. I mean, my mindset in developing this course was to try and help you to understand the full range of issues and standards that need to be considered if you're going to implement an e-health strategy. So, as I said earlier on today, it's how you, as leaders, in a sense, deliver the capabilities that are going to be needed to turn strategy into a deliverable action plan. And obviously, you can't do everything yourself, which means that you need both to get the skills that you yourselves need as individuals, and I hope this course has perhaps given you some suggestions as to what, where you can go if something is appealed to you in particular. But more importantly, it's so that you can understand a little better the many different aspects of introducing e-health that may need to be considered by people working in different parts of your health system enterprise. So if you're sitting in a Ministry of Health or working at national level, the standards and information issues that you're dealing with will be a little different from those that are being dealt with by your colleagues who are introducing e-health systems in a hospital. So what I'm hoping is that you've got enough from this course to enable your colleagues who are perhaps working in a hospital or at a community level to know where they can go to get the sorts of training and guidance and advice that is out there. So it's just enabling you to take a better informed decision about where to guide others, which is why I wanted to ask the question, and let me repeat it. Are there other topics that you think would be actually also helpful in improving the capacity of your staff that you manage directly or indirectly? So, for example, and I mentioned this, I think, in the overview and during webinar 2. For example, a lot depends upon having a good understanding of budgeting and financial management and figuring out reasonable procurement deals. And I haven't said very much at all about those topics in this webinar series. It may be that that's not that relevant to any of you, fine, but that's just an example that occurs to me of a topic that I haven't covered that might be of interest and useful to you. But if there are others, then that would be really helpful for you to share now, if you could, so that AeHIN can think about how it can improve the range of support that it gives to each of you, either in webinars like this or perhaps by more direct in-country coaching and mentoring support. So can I, again, let me ask people to share their thoughts about things that they would like to see covered and the ways in which they would like themselves or their colleagues to build up their knowledge. Thanks, Ellie.
Okay, thanks. Also, I'm gonna read the messages in our chat box right now from Sushil again. Thanks, Aliyah and Peter and AeHIN team for arranging such a wonderful webinar. A lot of resources are available now, and I'm quite optimistic that this will help us better shape our strategy. From Dr. Alvin Mucello, we should pool our expertise from the AeHIN membership and share them among others. Last week, there were COBIT 5 trainees who got certified, and they can be a good resource for the general AeHIN membership. And this relates to the current resource or knowledge that we have in our network. And it was also said that 22 people passed the COBIT framework certification exam. And maybe this is an input for the COBIT 5 extended e-learning course that our participants are requesting right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we can move forward to our AeHIN Academy thoughts and learning. Other questions or other comments from the floor? Okay, go ahead, Dr. Alvin.
Yes, thank you, Aliyah. Peter, this is Alvin. Just yesterday, I attended a national conference of the Information Technology Administrators of the Department of Health. So there were about 30 people from all parts of the country, and they were looking for something like this, something that can give them updates of what's the latest in the field of IT management, from governance down to delivery. And so I think there was a motion from the floor amongst the participants that they would subscribe to the course, and I think that's what's next for the Philippines, at least for the Philippines. Over.
Good. Well, that's encouraging. to rerun the course for them?
Same content, and then maybe we can have a extension of the 8 webinars with some local discussions amongst the participants.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be the next step here.
I'd be interested also to hear from other countries too about how they would like to see the messages I've been trying to put over actually developed, so that more people can become engaged with the topic. How can we develop what I've been sharing sitting here in the UK over a screen with what will actually give you real engagement with large numbers of people on the ground in your particular country?
Any suggestions and questions from our floor, and any response to our question? I think we could move on with our AeHIN Academy more with slowly introducing overview and concepts on establishing e-health strategy and reporting it to the network, because it's really important for the network to see what is happening in our country so that we will know how to tailor fit instructions or course materials like what we're doing now in AeHIN Academy.
Yeah. Good.
Any comments, suggestions from the floor? Dr. Jakir from Bangladesh said that we should continue our session because it's really helpful for sharing and learning. Yes, actually, Bangladesh is currently organizing a local 18-hour, and also Thailand. Maybe we could look in topics for their specific needs on e-health strategy in their AeHIN hour, local AeHIN hour in their own language.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Any other responses from our floor, maybe from the course materials that have been provided, and even to the mode of delivery and resources shared in our portal, AeHINacademy.org, because all of this will really be helpful, and all of this are being welcomed by the AeHIN Academy course organizers to better improve facilitating this kind of activity for our network. Maybe from Jay, or maybe from Dr. Martha Umali from the Philippines. Maybe from Dr. Jai Ganesh. Question is okay. We have another question about how about Val IT and Zachman in COBIT 5 slides from Dr. Sambat of Cambodia. I think he is particularly asking about IT and Zachman included in a COBIT 5 slide.
Sorry, IT investment?
IT and Zachman in COBIT 5 slide. Dr. Sambat, maybe you could clarify in our chat. The value of IT and Zachman in COBIT 5. How about including that Peter? I think you specify COBIT.
I'm still not quite getting the question. I understand COBIT 5, and then the value of.
I think he's asking of including IT, Val IT or value of IT and Zachman in a COVID-5 discussion? I think this is his question.
The value of ICT and
Zachman. Zachman in COVID-5.
Zachman, sorry. Of Zachman, the enterprise architecture.
Right.
Yes.
The value of this in COVID-5.
Yes. Okay. So the value of Zachman really is that it's a very good taxonomy, and I personally think that actually it doesn't, although it is a very good taxonomy, so that you can check that you have asked the right questions of each of the different people working in an enterprise, it doesn't actually give you a method or a set of processes that take you from, okay, so I've asked the question, so now what do I do? And the nice thing about COBIT-5 and TOGAF is that they do actually address the issues of how you align an enterprise architecture with what you need to deliver it. So I would, my own understanding would be that although Zachman connects and can be mapped to COBIT-5 in the same place, so to speak, as TOGAF, actually its strength is more to do with it being a taxonomy, whereas COBIT is more to do about how you control the operations of an organisation. It's much more geared to taking decisions and actions and following them up. And that's why it connects well with TOGAF and indeed ITIL. So yes, it can be mapped to COBIT-5, but I think TOGAF is a better fit.
Right. How about giving a separate session for just the management principles in an AeHIN strategy versus the actual tools to build up an AeHIN strategy?
The theory and practice, do you mean?
Yes, the theory and practice, separate session.
Yes. Yeah, that's a suggestion, is it, for another webinar?
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Yep. And of course, that sort of webinar would be much better if it is illustrated with real examples from, your region. That would be great. And that's why I think making the most of the AeHIN network to share examples and share knowledge can be really helpful, because then it gives the person who's delivering the webinar the opportunity to illustrate the general points with some specific local examples.
Right. I think that would be a very good idea for us, but in a way, this should be delivered in a mode wherein everyone will have ease of participating, because I believe that all of our attendees here are, yes, quite busy with their own office work and their own commitments, but this session on our AeHIN Academy for sharing AeHIN stories on their strategies is really interesting and really vital. There is power in sharing stories and current implementation. So I think that session would be a very good one when we incorporate this in AeHIN Academy. We allot one session wherein we will just present and talk and share these experiences. We will facilitate this online, and we get or lift some ideas from our participants, and they tailor fit it together so that we would have a reference on current implementations that are existing. And we can see the differences, the similarities in ways on which we can address the problems or the challenges.
Very good. Okay, so shall I just move on, just so that we've got time right at the end, because I want to just give you some thoughts about some capacity building resources. Is that okay?
Go ahead, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That is, of course, sorry, just let me move my laptop on. This is the problem when I don't move my machine, it freezes from time to time.
Okay, Peter, we can always wait. It's something that our participants are really interested about.
Okay. Right. Okay. So this slide, coming back to Dr. Sandon's point about TOGAF, or my point in replying to his question about Zachman and TOGAF. This illustrates what I was trying to say quite nicely, and I wanted to share it with you because I think it's a nice way in the context of TOGAF of understanding what we're trying to do in this webinar series, because you'll see on the left side of the diagram, you've got, it says skilled resource pool. And basically what TOGAF is saying is, look, to be able to implement TOGAF architectures, you need to have people who've got the right skills and knowledge that they will get from the background of their profession or from architecture of professionals. And you want to have a pool of people that you can assign to a particular project who may have generic skills or they may have specific skills. So this just makes the obvious point that you need governance bodies to get everything organised, and you need resources, in this case of architectures, to draw on. And then you need to have an understanding of the business that you're trying to improve, or the aspect of the business you're trying to improve, and the way in which that has been framed into a project, for which there may, of course, be a contract. So once you've got the governance and knowledge sources and business operations and projects and contracts agreed, then you need to have the right people delivering it. And to make that happen, you have to have them already having the right skills and knowledge. So TOGAF recognises that you need to invest in having a skilled pool of resources and capabilities. And my basic point is, it's true of TOGAF. Actually, it's true of the other aspects of enabling e-health strategies to be delivered. And I'm hoping that this webinar series actually helps you develop the skilled resource pools that will be needed to deal with things like, for example, information security or information standards or governance arrangements. You know, all these are different aspects of making the right things happen. So I'm just picking out a very nice diagram from within the TOGAF body of literature to illustrate the basic point that we need to have pools of resources. And then I thought I'd just conclude with some other capacity building resources to kind of complement what I've already given you. And I've given you some hooks there to COBIT, to the Open Group and through them TOGAF. And then for some of the project management organisations. And then I've concluded with just giving you a pointer, just so you don't forget to keep an eye out for these massive open online courses that are becoming available. Right? You may find those ones that I've flagged there of interest, or you may not. But the point is they are becoming more widely available now, and I thought that I should draw your attention to them as another resource that you may wish to draw on as you take your work forward. So this is now the last quiz, and this time it's with a difference. So we've been rehearsing some of these issues, but we want to get clarity around what topic is going to be of most relevance to your personal needs, and what two capacity building topics might need to be addressed with most urgency to support e-health strategy development and implementation in your country, and in what topics would you benefit from additional e-health capacity building webinars. And in discussion with Dr. Alvin, the suggestion has been that the answers to the questions will be used by AeHIN to organise small group virtual discussions in each country, with the intended involvement of ministry officials who have responsibility for e-health strategy and development. So I'm hoping that this will be a constructive process, and we would like your answers to the quiz by the end of, I think it's 10 days. So I reckon that'll be in effect the end of Sunday, the 8th of June. And also that the answers to this quiz time with the difference, and of course the others, will be needed to complete the certification process, for which the last stage will be completion of a brief survey to get your views on the course. And again, I perhaps Elia or Alvin can advise on when that survey needs to be completed by, but it would be helpful if that can be done so that we can learn and improve as we go along. So let me then conclude with the final feedback session and ask if there are any further questions or any suggestions. And perhaps Dr. Alvin and Elia, you might just respond about the issue to do with the survey.
Hello. All right. I think we're okay now. Regarding the survey, we have developed hello. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. We have developed a very short evaluation of AeHIN Academy of this eHealth 101 of this course, and it's now loaded in our www.aehinacademy.org website. And regarding the study that you have mentioned, we are now working on the methodology of that study, I think with one of our AeHIN Working Council members, and we will be rolling out that. We will give announcement on rolling out the surveys and the questionnaires on that. So I hope our AeHIN Academy participants will actively join that survey, so that we will get a more substantive information directly from those who are residing in the AeHIN member countries. So I think that's the information which I can share at the moment. Dr. Alvin will be adding more to that in the coming days. So please visit our www.aehin.org website. And for those of us here who are not yet member of AeHIN, I cordially invite you to be a member of our network, so that you will get more access to resources on eHealth and explore your current practice to contribute to better eHealth development in your country. So I think this ends our AeHIN Academy. Dr. Alvin, anything to add? Please go ahead.
Before we wrap up the series of webinars, I'd like to inform the group that we're now under discussions with the University of the Philippines, with University of Gadjah Mada, with Mahidol University, in International Medical University of Malaysia to find out how we can extend the AeHIN Academy, the 8 webinars, and embed them into the curricula of these respective universities. Another extension is localization of the course for the Ministry of Health of the Philippines, and we'll be happy to hear from the quiz that you will fill up on what things you think might be best ways to move forward with regards to building capacity for e-health governance and enterprise architecture and delivery in our part of the world. And before we say goodbye, I'd like to really extend our sincere gratitude to Dr. Peter Drury for the very hard work and very long hours that he spent preparing and delivering these courses. We don't have an applause sound clip right now, but if we had one, it has been it will be a standing ovation for you, Peter Drury. And we look forward to working with you again and ask you to help us with other contents we might need in AeHIN. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say thanks to all of you for your attention and participation. And thanks both to you, Alvin, and also to Aliyah. Between the two of you, you've helped make this a very pleasurable series to develop and deliver. If there are any queries, you have my email address, feel free. So thank you very much indeed.
Loop you in on what's next. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. And thank you so much for your queries, for your contributions. You can email us to secretariat@aehin.org. Again, Ms. Aliyah, yes? Anything?
Screenshot here, right? No screenshots for the 500 seats.
But I have to check. We don't have a. I can view. No, we just have to automate all the audio, but not the video.
We'll schedule something for that.
But we can have a screenshot of Dr. Peter and Dr. Alvin and me. But it's anyway, we can schedule a smaller meeting so that only for for 25 for all those 25 graduates or people that who will join. Thank you so much for other feedback. Yes, we have received a lot of feedback. We just have to share this in our AeHIN Academy website. Thank you so much, and good afternoon to all of you.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.